And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Coming up on Dan Wootton Tonight, has the ousting of Boris set a dangerous, undemocratic precedent? Patrick Stoner of the Alliance of Conservative Voters is live with a solution for angry Tories looking to right that wrong. Plus, I'll meet the British immigrants and Canadian journalists who have exposed the COVID tyranny of Justin Trudeau in court and are being ignored by the MSM. And as ever, I'm joined by my superstar panel, Daily Express columnist Carol Malone, senior reporter at the newspaper Benjamin Butworth, and former Brexit Party MEP Belinda DeLucy. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
Border Force officers in Dover now being physically attacked and assaulted by cross-channel migrants. What the hell is going on? We'll debate Boris's plea for his green energy targets to remain. Is that the right thing to do? We'll ask, is there perhaps a sterling crisis? Yes, yet another crisis that maybe Liz Truss will face from next Tuesday. And joining me on Talking Pints, Dr. Jan Hulper-Hayes. She is a political psychologist. She's an American. We'll ask, is Trump the right man to run again? But before all of that, let's get the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you. Good evening to you. NASA has postponed the launch of its new moon rocket over an issue with one of its engines. The uncrewed rocket is the world's most powerful to date and was due to propel a test capsule called Orion far from Earth's orbit into the moon's orbit. Engineers say an engine bleed couldn't be remedied, and that's the cause of the launch being called off today. They added the first opportunity for the next launch attempt will be this Friday, depending on how the engine bleed develops. Well, the Artemis 1 mission is aiming to prove people can go to the moon for longer and more sustainably than ever before. Mission manager Mike Sarafin explained there were a number of reasons why they decided to postpone the launch.
The combination of not being able to get the engine 3 chilled down and then the vent valve issue that they saw at the intertank really caused us to pause today, and we felt like we needed a little more time. There was also a series of weather issues throughout the window. We would have been no-go for weather at the beginning of the window due to precipitation, and later on in the window we would have been no-go for lightning.
Well, here in the final week of campaigning in the Conservative leadership contest, Liz Truss's team says she favours targeted support to ease the cost of living crisis. However, the candidate says she's not ruling anything out and says it wouldn't be right to announce an entire plan before she had seen Whitehall analysis. Chief Executive of the market research company Ipsos, Ben Page, says she's under pressure.
Public now wants to see more action and more spending. She's slightly against the grain of the things that she says she stands for, but she's probably going to be forced to do it when she turns her attention from the small number of people who are, of course, choosing the leader of the Conservative Party to the electorate as a whole.
Well, the Environment Minister and Team Rishi supporter Victoria Prentice told us the former Chancellor believes help should go to those who need it most.
Rishi's plan is very much to target that help at the most vulnerable households. So, for example, pensioner households or people with disabilities or households on the lowest incomes. And I think that's the right way to go. I know this is hard for everybody, but for some people it's really hard, and we need to help them get through it.
International news, and residents living near Europe's biggest nuclear facility in Ukraine are each being given iodine tablets amid fears of a nuclear incident. Authorities handed out the medication to both parents and children living close to the Zaporizhzhia power station amid intense fighting in the area. That's as a team from the International Atomic Energy Agency also arrived in Ukraine to investigate a Russian-occupied facility, saying safety and security must be protected. The Prince of Wales will make a donation to aid charity Islamic Relief to help those affected by flooding in Pakistan. It follows a message from Her Majesty the Queen to the President of the country saying how deeply saddened she is by the loss of life and destruction. Pakistan is now appealing for international support as more than 1,000 people have lost their lives. The International Monetary Fund is looking to release an aid package worth $1.1 billion to help the impacted region. Unusually heavy monsoon rains have caused the flooding in both the north and the south of the country, destroying farmland, crops and harming the lives of more than 30 million people. Britain's biggest warship is limping back to port after a mechanical issue. HMS Prince of Wales left Portsmouth on Saturday to spend the next 3 months working with US military partners in the Atlantic. But she stopped briefly at the Isle of Wight and is now moving slowly from there towards Gosport, where it's understood the sheltered area will make it easier for divers to examine the damage, which is believed to be to a propeller shaft. The family of a 16-year-old boy who died at the Leeds Festival have paid tribute to their beautiful and fiercely independent son. David Cellino fell ill whilst at the music event and died yesterday despite the efforts of paramedics to save him. West Yorkshire Police is investigating whether the teenager had taken ecstasy just before his death. The force says it's believed to be an isolated incident. Some refuse collectors will continue to go on strike in Scotland as 2 unions rejected the latest offer from the authorities. The offer made to bin workers included a one-off payment of up to £2,000 and it was rejected by Unite and GMB. One other union is still in negotiations. Staff in Edinburgh and another number of local administrations across Scotland have also been staging industrial action over the last week over pay. That's it. You're up to date on TV, online and on your radio via DAB+. With GB News, where now it's time for Nigel.
Good evening. I hope you've enjoyed your bank holiday Monday. We're here as ever. And you saw those pictures a moment ago, HMS Prince of Wales limping back into port. But it doesn't look very good, does it, for an island nation that's always been proud of its Royal Navy? And whilst we're on that theme, Priti Patel said she was going to put the Royal Navy in the Channel. That would sort the whole thing out. No problem at all. Truth is, the Royal Navy have been totally ineffectual. The morale of those on board is not good because it's not what they joined the Royal Navy for. And the Royal Navy is being withdrawn from the Channel. And we've learnt today that 2 private companies will be given contracts valued at £2.5 million and they'll work alongside Border Force for the next 6 months. Basically, we're paying private firms to be a taxi service. All you have to do is get 12 miles from British beaches and you'll be brought in and you'll be processed and you'll be put into a 4-star hotel. That's the way that it works. Let's have a look at the numbers. 8,700 so far this month have crossed the Channel. That's as many as came in the whole of 2020. 1,295 last Tuesday, 804 last Thursday, and last Saturday, 915, and they all came in the morning because the wind was due to freshen in the afternoon. And you can look at these pictures and these floats, those of you watching this on television, to see that the whole thing is completely and utterly out of control. But something I hadn't seen before, and bear in mind it was this programme that first said something was happening in Albania. And I notice a lot of newspaper articles now based on things that we've revealed. On Saturday, I had somebody in Dover Docks counting the numbers in, and he said to me he'd never seen such an aggressive group of young men walk up those gangplanks, and he's been following this, studying this, ever since the problem began back in 2018. And it backs up what Lucy Morton, a professional officer with the ISU union who represent Border Force, she said this just before the weekend. She said, Channel migrants are now predominantly Albanians, and I was told Saturday it looked like 70% Albanians, and that staff are now facing, I mean, can you believe this, increasing violence. They tend to go with the nationalities, Morton said. There are a lot of young males, a lot of prison tattoos, and prison haircuts. I've had 2 staff attacked in the last week and 3 bitten. That is what is going on in Dover. No more can we pretend that those crossing the channel are poor, desperate people. Perhaps some of them are. The vast majority are young males coming to enter criminal activity in this country. And by the looks of it, I've got to ask myself a question. Are the Albanians literally emptying their prisons? I don't know the answer to this, but you heard that from Lucy Morton. Prison tattoos and prison haircuts. This should be, in my view, a national emergency. I mean, how many more moped thefts do we want in London? How many more stabbings? How many more shootings? We've got law and order declining in every one of our major cities, and every police force will tell you the growth of Albanian leg gangs over the last couple of years has been a major problem. What is to be done? Well, it seems that Priti Patel gives us another big promise, that there's been an agreement with the Albanian government that lots of them will be deported. I won't be holding my breath. I'll believe it when I see it. Well, joining me to talk about this is Norman Baker, former Home Office Minister and, of course, former Lib Dem Member of Parliament for Lewis and regular contributor to programmes here at GB News. Norman, in your days in the Home Office, we didn't face this problem with the channel, but we did face foreign criminals, and they were very often deported and often in quite large numbers. I mean, can you believe, Norman, this situation with the Albanians at the moment?
It's very serious, Nigel, and let me give you a couple of figures, if I may, to put things in perspective. The first thing to say is that the top 5 countries in terms of nationalities who arrive in this country through the channel or whatever it happens to be come from Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, Eritrea and Albania. Now, the first 4 of those represent countries which are dysfunctional and where people may well be under threat of torture or execution or some other form of treatment which justifies an asylum claim. And you'll know that last year, 76% of those who claimed asylum were actually granted asylum, and a further 51% of the remainder, so another 11% or whatever, were granted appeal successfully. So most of those who arrive actually are genuine refugees, deemed to be by the process we have. However, I agree with you, there are a different issue with Albanians, and Albanians are separate from that. And I don't believe Albanian refugee status is by and large justified. Why? Because Albania is a functioning democracy. It's corrupt in some ways, it's not perfect, but it is a functioning democracy where people can vote and change the government. It's got civil liberties. And therefore, those who arrive from Albania in particular, I think, are people who are predominantly economic migrants, which I think is why the government is right, actually, to single out this particular country for particular treatment. Now, here's the problem, Nigel. You and I will actually agree on this. I suspect we won't agree on everything, but might agree on this. There are 118,000 people waiting to be processed. 118,000 people, 72% of them have been waiting for more than 6 months. This is the problem. If we had a system, and I argue this in government, if we have a system which enables people to be assessed quickly, processed quickly, and either integrated into our society or deported much more quickly, that would be the answer.
Well, Norman, you and I can argue the 76%. My understanding is they're not actually granted asylum status. They're given a period to stay in the country whilst the whole thing's sorted out. But that aside, I agree with you 100% that these Albanians don't qualify. They don't qualify as refugees. They are economic migrants. And more worrying still is the growth of Albanian crime in this country, and that's undisputed. Can we, this is my question to you as somebody who's been in the job, are we able to deport them back to Albania all the while we're signed up to the ECHR?
Yes, we can, because it can be a very quick assessment which should take place, and that assessment will probably conclude that they are economic migrants. There's no reason why that shouldn't take place. That's the case under the ECHR or any other system you've got. And by the way, when I was at the Home Office, one of the problems with Albanians in particular was associated with trafficking of women for sexual exploitation purposes, trafficking of children. You know, they are not a happy addition to this country.
Norman Baker, well spoken. I hope what you say comes to pass, and thank you for joining us tonight here on GB News. Now, Boris Johnson is 1 week away from giving up the premiership, and it is clear he is now battling for his legacy. And I think the one thing that Boris appears to be the most proud of now is the net zero target. Yes, it was passed into law by Mrs May without a vote in the House of Commons, but Boris has picked it up and embraced it. Maybe his new wife had something to do with that. But he's got great enthusiasm. He wants to turn us into the Saudi Arabia of wind and other things. And Boris is pleading with his successor, for which we can guess is really, a chat directly at Liz Truss, who has talked about green subsidies, etc. And he's saying we must preserve net zero. So is it right that we stick with these targets? Is it right that we stick with Boris's agenda? Or has the time come for perhaps a little rethink? Well, joining me to debate this is Tom Burke. Tom, of course, a friend of the programme, chairman of E3G and former executive director of Friends of the Earth. And Chris Morrison, environment editor at the Daily Sceptic, joins us as well. And Chris is a climate sceptic. And the first thing we'll discuss is the use of the word climate emergency. We see horrendous flooding taking place in Pakistan at the moment. We had a big drought in our country, of course, up until just a few days ago. Chris Morrison, is it right to call this a climate emergency?
Well, recently, Professor Richard Lindzen of MIT described the current climate narrative, and by that he meant the emergency, breakdown, whatever, as absurd. And he said, but trillions of dollars being paid to grant-dependent academics, agenda-driven journalists, he said, means that it's not absurd. And so is there an emergency? No, there isn't an emergency. It's an invention. But
there are these weather events, big weather events, as I say, drought conditions in much of the UK, mass flooding in Pakistan. We had nearly 30 people killed in the Midwest of America. Are these normal weather events?
Yes, they are. They're perfectly normal. And you can debunk every single one of these extreme claims. There is no scientific proof. There is no scientific paper that is yet attributed. Of course, we call them extreme. We used to call them bad weather, of course, a few years ago. There is no paper, there is no scientific evidence that attributes them to humans burning fossil fuel. There isn't a single, for instance, as well, a single climate paper, peer-reviewed, that proves that humans cause climate change.
Right.
It's an unproven hypothesis.
Right. OK, thank you very much indeed. Tom, calling it an emergency, we see an alarming number of young people reportedly very concerned, angst-driven, mental health problems. Are we being a bit sort of irresponsible in using this term emergency?
Well, I don't think we're being irresponsible. I disagree with Chris. I think Chris is very brave. But frankly, if he's right, then 190-odd governments around the world are all wrong and have been completely fooled by some magic, mysterious conspiracy that's convinced everybody.
OK, so let me come back to that. Do you think it's right and responsible to use the phrase climate emergency?
Yeah, I do think it's right.
You do think it's right?
Yeah, I do think it's right. I think we've got no time. I think to really understand...
People gluing themselves to roads and blocking the M25.
Look, if people choose the way they want to react to emergencies, however they choose, I'm not defending or criticising anybody. But quite simply, the real thing about this problem is it's got a time clock on it. If we get it wrong, we're in real trouble. And that is exactly what you have in an emergency. You have a limited amount of time to deal with it, and that's the situation.
How would you respond to the point Chris made that there is no actual proof?
Well, he's just wrong.
He's
just wrong. Where is the proof? What do you mean you want me to take out of my pocket?
There is a consensus of governments, and I agree with that. There is a consensus of many scientists, but not all, that man-made CO2 is contributing to global warming. I absolutely understand that. His question was, or his statement was, there's no actual proof.
Well, what constitutes proof? Tell me what you think proof is.
I would like to see a climate paper that proves beyond doubt that humans burning fossil fuel cause the climate to change.
Well, I think you should read the latest report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change.
That is a narrative. That is a narrative.
I'm sorry, it's not a narrative. It's a report by a very large group of scientists, endorsed by a very large number of governments. I don't know what else you think constitutes proof.
Well, I mean, there is the World Climate Declaration, so there are a growing number of scientists who say we should question this.
Come on, wait, when you look at the list of the scientists who signed up to those things, turns out not very many of them are actually climate scientists, and what's more, none of the work has been peer-reviewed.
One fact I was given the other day, I don't know whether it's right or not, you'll tell me, that of all the carbon dioxide produced in the world every year, mankind only produces 3% of it. Is that right?
I've no idea, actually. I don't know the exact number on that.
It is right.
Well, in a sense, so what? I mean, the point is not how much carbon dioxide is around, it's what it's doing for the climate.
Well, my thought was if 97% of CO2 is being produced by volcanoes, and naturally we have no control over that. But it's a point of clarification.
Let me help you, Nigel.
Go on.
There's a cycle of carbon in the atmosphere, right? Of which plants and you and I are breathing out carbon dioxide, and there's a cycle which returns that to rocks or vegetation and so on. If you add additional, and that's in balance, and has been in balance till we started burning fossil fuels.
How do you know it's in balance?
You'll get your chance, Chris.
Sorry.
Bear with me.
So that little 3% is what tips it out of balance. And it's like anything, any gyroscope, anything, you tip it out of balance, you get some pretty catastrophic consequences.
Man has upset the balance of the world and of nature, really, is what Tom's saying.
Well, again, where is the proof? It's possible. We do increase the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere.
Yeah, we do.
But the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere is at a paleoclimatic low. It's 400 parts per million. If it went down to about 180 parts per million, life on Earth would cease because there wouldn't be enough CO2 for plant food. So, and in the past, going back 600 million years and going back through the period, CO2 has been much, much higher. It's been 15 times higher. And we can see
there wasn't much living on the planet then.
Well, there was. No, there was. No, from about 300.
Well, I tell you what. Before we go back to what happened 600 million years ago, given the time constraints that we've got, and we've debated the emergency point. Quickly, Tom. Boris absolutely went for this. He went for net zero. He went for renewable energy. Is he right to say that legacy should be preserved?
He wasn't wrong about everything, so he was right on this thing. So absolutely right on this. That legacy should be preserved. Not much of the rest of his legacy should be preserved.
Okay, well, that's a separate point entirely. Chris, final thought to you.
Net zero.
Should we put it on hold? Should we get rid of it? What is, or is Tom right that actually this really matters and it's important?
Net zero is a disaster waiting to happen. It will have appalling consequences in the near future. We know that the power is going to start failing. One hopes it doesn't in this winter, but if it does, thousands of people will die of the cold. Most people, or a large proportion of the population, will not be able to afford to warm their house. And it is all down to net zero. It's all down to the idea that you can take out the one cheap, reliable fuel that has powered a human society for the last 100 years and given us enormous prosperity.
Which is fossil fuel.
76%.
Gentlemen, I'm going to... Now, didn't I do well there as a neutral umpire? I tried not to take sides. Really unusual. It may never happen again on this programme. But I've done my best. In a moment, we're looking at crisis after crisis, aren't we? We've got a climate crisis. We've got a cost of living crisis. We've got an NHS crisis, a crime crisis, something nobody is talking about, but that I worry for the next Prime Minister. Do we also have perhaps a sterling crisis? And what would that mean for you? All of that in a moment. Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
So I ask you, where do you stand on this debate? Should Boris's legacy on net zero be preserved, or is it time for a fundamental rethink? One viewer says it was in all the parties' manifestos, there was no other option, give people a vote on net zero, and that will show its popularity. I have to say, I think if there was a referendum on net zero, and we really debated this openly, I think you'd be very, very surprised at how many members of the public would say, do you know what? We're not going to pay for this. Why should we pay for this? We produce less than 1% of global CO2. It should be China and others cutting back, not us. I think you'd be very, very surprised. Another says, Boris needs to drop his obsession with the green net zero, green rubbish. Well, Boris, it looks to me like he will never drop it. The question is, what is Liz Truss, if it's to be her, gonna do? Ryan says, no, the policies should go straight on the bonfire. The green agenda is the main cause of the cost of living crisis. Ryan, wash your mouth out with soap and water. Nobody, but nobody is allowed to say that. We will not allow the great British public to understand that they've been absolutely ripped off on green subsidies which have been given to rich landowners and giant multinationals. But we're not supposed to discuss that. But hey, here on GB News we do. And finally, Michael says, no way, it should be like Boris Johnson, kicked into the long grass. Whose idea was it to blow up coal-powered fire stations? We've blown up loads of them. Now, something that is not being discussed at all in this leadership election campaign, but that I think could become very, very important, is the level of sterling against the dollar. And for those of you watching on television, we'll show you the chart right now. Last September, sterling was 140 against the dollar, but it is now languishing down at 117. Well, one man who told me when sterling was 130 that it was due for a rapid and sharp correction, so he's the form horse, he's got it right so far, is Martin Malone, economic advisor to Oriel Partners. Martin, you told me at 1:30 this would happen, that things were going wrong. Why are we not discussing sterling? Why is it not part of the leadership debate? Why is it not a mainstream argument?
I think it's the centre of economics, and it's basically very, very difficult to get people excited about a currency because it's very, very tricky to understand. And it's also exceptionally difficult to try and predict where it's going to go. Most of the people in the City of London try to do it every day. Most investors try to do it, many very badly. So I think that's just the difficulty attached to currency, is people just stay clear from what they don't know.
Now, it seems to me that the pound is down against the dollar, that the euro has broken down below parity with the dollar. It's all about energy, isn't it? Europe dependent now upon Russia to keep the lights on and the factories open. We're dependent not so much on Russia, but on Qatar, on Norway, etc. And America, pretty much energy independent. Isn't that what the currency markets are telling us?
Yes, I think so. I think that's exactly right. Around 90% of UK energy was domestically based. Now it's closer to 60%. So the UK is really beholden to the price at the pump is you're importing it. Therefore, the cost of it is due to that currency appreciation, that currency devaluation, but also depreciation of oil and gas. So you're getting a double hit. And the US don't have that. The US has actually had a currency that's gone up 20% in the last 12 months, which actually helps their inflation rate roll over, which doesn't here.
Well, let's come to that. So, you were right from 130 to here. If we're to fall much further, and if parity with the dollar for the pound was on the horizon, that would be a full-blown sterling crisis, the likes of which we haven't seen. Well, we saw it a bit with the exchange rate mechanism in the early 90s, and then you've got to go back to the mid-70s. Let me ask you, do you believe a sterling crisis is coming?
Yes, I think there's a very, very good chance, maybe 70-80% chance that we will see one. And we potentially can break parity against the pound, against the dollar, probably by Christmas or maybe early next year. And the issue is that basically there is so many crises faces the new government, starting from next week, that they will just let the currency go. It's an easy option to let it go.
But if you let the currency go, and we buy dollars, we buy oil, we buy gas in dollars, that means energy prices go up even more.
Correct. And it also will force the Bank of England's hand.
And inflation goes up more.
Inflation will go up. Bank of England will be forced to hike interest rates more. People's mortgage rates will go up. So this is why it's very, very tricky. But the bottom line is, in UK government history, particularly in the 1970s, where they had a disastrous Labour government, where they actually ended up getting a bailout from the IMF in 1976, you could see a full-blown crisis. And we could easily see another 20% off the pound over the next 3 to 6, 9 months.
And that would mean interest rates having to go up quite sharply.
Very sharply. And we saw it in 1992 when the Tory government was in power. Norman Lamont was actually in charge of interest rates at the time, and I think actually at one stage put them briefly to 20%. Now, I'm not saying that is going to happen UK interest rates, but we could easily see 4 or 5% on UK interest rates, and people's mortgage rates would be higher than those levels. And that is something that people are going to have to be very, very careful about. But the currency is one of the major legs that the UK government will find it very, very difficult to manage.
Martin Malone, thank you very much indeed. And bear in mind, that is Martin's opinion. He's been right over the course of the last few months. There's no guarantee that he's right. That's his opinion. But I have to say, just looking at it, just looking at energy and where we are. Oh, there are some saying it's fine, it's all over. Germany has now restocked its reserves. Everything's going to be great. Prices will come back down. I still fear further shocks. And I think in a very uncertain world, people are increasingly saying the dollar, that's where we want our money to be. We'll see what happens, see how it plays out. Either way, I have to say that Liz Truss will face perhaps the biggest inbox, perhaps the most crises any Prime Minister has faced, literally since Winston Churchill in May 1940. Nobody since then has come in to a bigger set of challenges, and I suspect Sterling is among them. Now, my What the Farage moment, and this really is something I've got to tell you. So on Saturday night, I'm invited to go to the O2, to go to the KSI fight. Some of you are saying, what is KSI? This is influencer boxing. These are YouTubers, they're musicians, they're rappers. They're followed by millions and millions of young people in this country. And one of the things they now do is they have boxing bouts against each other. Here I was at the O2 on Saturday.
You and Boris Johnson?
Oh, I do. I could deal with him. Boris, if you're listening now, let's do it.
That's awesome. Nigel, thanks for your time.
Nice to meet you. Well, there you are. But I have to say this to you. The O2 was full. The average age was about 18. People were well turned out, incredibly well behaved. Yes, of course, we sang the national anthem, and I did so with gusto as well. And I talked to lots and lots of young people there. They said this is grassroots boxing. And even if the professional boxing federations turn their noses up at this, something remarkable is happening here. But the other point, and I'm guessing that virtually nobody in Westminster media or politics will have spotted it, but these influencers, like KSI, followed by millions and millions of people, actually are providing, I think, pretty good role models to our young people. They are a counter against the left-wing propaganda that is being fed to these youngsters through our schools and universities. And it was, for me, a really fascinating, transformative moment. I've seen out there that there is a big upwelling of millions of young people who actually are quite patriotic, quite decent. Yes, of course, there were some youthful excesses, but something really, really interesting is going on here. And indeed, I saw a bit of this in America a couple of years ago when various rappers, music rappers, turned out to be supporters of President Trump. Politically, there are millions of young people who'll be voting at the next general election and the one after, and these influencers could have a very, very major impact on millions and millions of votes. You heard it here first. Some more of your reactions coming in, and quite a lot of passion actually over Boris Johnson wanting his legacy of net zero to be preserved. One viewer says, of course net zero should go. Save us some money. We need it more than ever. Jane says, doomed to fail from the start. David says, what is the point in a net zero policy when China behave the way they do? And another says, I'm all for helping the environment, but making us poorer during a cost of living crisis is just ridiculous. And that really is the point. These policies, and it's not just Boris Johnson, it's not just Theresa May, this has been going on for years. The whole push to wind has been funded on billions and billions of pounds of taxpayer subsidy, and it's you at home that have been picking up the tab for this over the course of the last 20 years, and nobody ever thought it polite or right to tell you that you were doing that. Our bills have gone up hugely, and frankly, we find ourselves now with a cost of living crisis way worse than it needed to be. We've got to become energy independent. And if in the end, part of that mix is more green renewables, that's fine. But at the moment, it doesn't work. And at the moment, our over-reliance on wind means the lights literally could go out in February. Well, this debate on energy is not just happening in this country. It's been a huge point of difference between President Trump and President Biden. Indeed, Trump and Obama too. And joining me in a moment is Jan Halperhays, and she is a former world vice president of Republicans abroad, but perhaps more interestingly for you at home, she is a political psychologist. And I'm going to ask her, does Donald Trump have the temperament? Does he have the personality to fight the 2024 general election? Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel, And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
It's my favourite time of the day. Of course it is. It's time for Talking Pints. I love this part of the show, and I'm very pleased that Dr. Jan Halper-Hayes has joined me. Welcome to the programme.
Thanks for having me. It's great to see you.
Well, we've met before, of course, as I've popped across the pond once or twice. So just to sort of go into, before we talk about Republican politics and your passion for all of this and Republicans abroad and all of those things, so you are trained, you are qualified as a behavioural psychologist.
Yes, yeah.
And
political. I specialized originally in organizational and leadership. And then and I've always been involved in politics, but when I helped set up Republicans overseas in 2014, I became even more fascinated, but also very concerned. And so I went back to school. In 2017, I went to Stanford to their summer institute for political psychology, so I could get certified as a political psychologist and really understand those dynamics that much more. And it has helped quite a bit.
Now, way before you got very involved in politics, you of course have had a successful business career. You come from a family of sort of serial entrepreneurs and I guess capitalists in a genuine sense of the term, as opposed to global corporatists.
Oh, absolutely. Earn your keep, work hard, be innovative, create something. In other words, when I get up every day, and even if I went back to work now, the first thing is, would I be making a difference? And that's always what our parents said. Are we making a difference? Whether it was when my parents had a shop in Port Sacal, which was a big tourist area in San Pedro outside of Los Angeles. It was always, how are we going to make a difference for other people? And I spent probably the past 8 years really giving back. And it has been so fulfilling. People go, oh, you're not getting paid for this? No, I'm actually paying for the privilege.
But you did get paid along the way, and you've run a very successful business. And from what I can understand of what you were doing, you were working with big companies, successful companies, chief executives, and trying to get them to organise themselves and function better.
Right. Yeah. For example, I led the merger and acquisition for Taylor Nelson Sofres, TNS, which was a big company here. And they were in 90 different countries. And so for 7 months, I hit almost all of their offices. But we ended up picking the best of the 400 leaders. And then I went around working with them as teams to figure out how they were going to implement the strategic rationale. Because there's one thing about the reason for the deal, and there's another thing about, is this going to work?
And working in those days predominantly with men.
Yes.
Men chairmen, men CEOs, and you've got some interesting observations on all of this that you've put into a book. Please tell us about it.
Well, Quiet Desperation, The Truth About Successful Men.
So what have you learned about successful men?
Well, here's the thing, that what prompted me to write it, which I wrote it a number of years ago, was that there was someone named John Malloy who wrote Dress for Success for Women, which was basically telling them to be just like men. And all of the books at that time were coming out to tell women, be like men. But the men were telling me, there's something wrong here. I'm not hanging around for this gold watch because I don't get the gold watch anymore. Or, I have to work for a boss, and the minute they take him out and they put a new boss in, suddenly work life is so much better. And so I really was concerned if I could make a difference, really, as a psychologist. It was in my early years. And so I asked 42, well, first I asked 56 men if they wanted free counseling for a year. 42 said yes. 10 months into it, we decided we had to go another year. And so
male bosses now need counseling, do they?
Well, I'm talking late 80s,
wow.
Early 90s.
I'm astonished.
Well, and the thing is that was when men were told, oh, you can't feel. So I was teaching a leadership course at Harvard, and during the summer, so it was the executives that were there. And at the dinner in the evening, one of them got up because I was talking about the conflict between being rational, logical, and objective versus trusting your gut reaction. And so one of them got up and paged one of the other men who had been giving me a hard time during the day, and he said, hey, Jack Durliat, your internist has called. You don't have indigestion. It was a gut reaction to what Halper was saying. You know, and see, for me, which I am so bothered by this masculine toxicity. I mean, you know, it's just one more way they're trying to make any group of any human being awful, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I think for a lot of men in business now, they're terrified of what they can say or what they can do, and of course quotas are coming in very, very rapidly, and I worry that we sort of throw out of the window the idea of choosing the best person because we have quotas and targets.
Well, there's that, but the other thing is that by making people so afraid, you completely destroy any chance for innovation. But the other aspect of it, this whole Me Too thing component, is that it has made women victims. I mean, Frank Langella, his young co-star, and she went and tattled on him because he maybe put his hand in a scene on her knee or something. And you know, when you think about that, if these young women really want independence and to stand on their own 2 feet, they don't play victim. They don't play baby. And more importantly is they don't go out to ruin someone else, and vice versa.
Yeah, I mean, clearly some men have behaved terribly, but the point you're making is that actually telling women they're victims is bad and negative. And I have to say, I think that applies to ethnic minorities and others. Tell people they're victims and they're probably going to underachieve in life, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, it is. Now, you've been very successful and, you know, American TV for years and all these different things you've done. But this burning passion for politics was always going to come to the fore.
It was.
And I guess the point of Republicans overseas, and you were global vice president of it, basically it's to get to make sure Americans vote, yeah?
Well, that was one part of it, but when I initially got involved, there was a new law that was coming into effect in July 2014. It was called the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act, FATCA. And so all 9 million at that time overseas Americans were going to be affected by it. In fact, by the end of 2015, nearly 6,000 overseas Americans gave up their citizenship because of this foreboding tax situation.
So sort of double taxation in effect.
It was even worse than double taxation, and we were being penalized. A woman who made $30,000 a year, her tax bill went from a couple of $100s up to $2,500 just to fill out all the paperwork, and it became so onerous. And even if an American owned 10% of a business here, then it meant all the business partners who weren't American were going to be affected by this law as well. So that's how we first got involved in it. And we raised over $1 million and we took it to the Supreme Court.
I remember.
Yeah.
No, I remember. It was a big victory. Now, the Republican Party that you first got involved in became a Republican, I'm going to argue, became from Reagan's day, you know, very much sort of moved towards the country club Republican, people who perhaps were not particularly conservative, pretty middle of the road. And then suddenly, into all of this in 2015, is the man from New York, the businessman, the really out there Donald Trump. I guess he must have been a hell of a shock to the Republican Party.
Oh, I would say that's a very good British understatement. Definitely. Not only a shock, and having been an outsider who also had been an outsider playing their game with them because he had the money to do it, but to be able to pull off what they couldn't pull off. For example, Paul Ryan, he said Trump didn't pay his dues, and Rand Paul had actually gone to Trump and said that Paul Ryan is sabotaging a chance to change the Affordable Care Act. I mean, in other words, all that kind of stuff, all that resentment.
A lot of internecine warfare. I mean, I'm struck, Jenny. I come to CPAC and I'm regularly back and forth, and I've got to know the President Trump pretty well. And I'm struck that you've now got a Republican Party I mean, there are lots of Ron DeSantis fans, of course.
Right.
But even the Ron DeSantis fans still admire what Trump did as president. The problem is, and you're the psychologist, not me, so many people say, well, you know what, the Abraham Accords were great. The reducing corporation tax for American companies, massively out of date. Did a lot of good things in America. But it's his behaviour, it's his language, it's the aggressive appearance of Trump sometimes that puts people off. Now, it doesn't bother me tuppence. I'm perfectly happy with the way. But that's not the point. The point is you can have a base of 41% of Americans who love him, but you've got to get a few more than that to win the presidential election. And if he was to run again, and this debate goes on about his personality, his temperament, you tell me, is he fit to do this again?
He's absolutely fit. And there's a difference between a personality and temperament, which I was able, because that was a big discussion between Hillary saying that he didn't have the temperament. And there is the presidential temperament tool that I actually asked Trump to take in 2015. And what came out of it, because we're born with our temperament. We don't develop our temperament. We develop our personality. We develop our behavior based on cultural influences, norms, etc. But Trump's temperament is one of action. It's not, and it is no different than John F. Kennedy's, than Lyndon Johnson's, than Bill Clinton's, than Ronald Reagan. His results fell right in with that, because he's a problem solver. And even JFK, when people recounted how he handled the job, if it was something yesterday, he didn't want to know about it. And if it was something tomorrow, he didn't want to know about it. He was dealing with what the issues were today.
Action this day, Winston Churchill used to say when he was over the river here.
Yes, exactly. And that is Trump. And
his personality, it's New Yorker, it's quite loud, it's quite out there, and that won't change.
No, it won't. But Eleanor Roosevelt said that great minds think about ideas, average minds think about events, and simple minds focus on people. And I feel psychologically, I actually am very concerned. We call it Trump derangement syndrome, but I can't really understand how people get so worked up in hating him, because for that kind of you don't know him.
Well,
you
listen,
see his behavior.
I had plenty of hatred here because I dared to challenge the established status quo. So people feel uncomfortable when somebody challenges their worldview. And now we've got the FBI raiding Mar-a-Lago and all the rest of it. I mean, you're quite a fan of his, aren't you?
Oh, absolutely.
And a friend of his.
Yes, absolutely. Look, people underestimate him. When he first came in and everyone was saying he's a fool, we're going to have our third world war, everything else. And he also said at the very beginning, I've got the goods on them all. And he keeps saying, I've got the goods on them all. And you and I know that is not a light thing, and we just have to be patient and wait to see what is going to happen.
Will I come to Washington, D.C. in the third week of January 2025 and stand there in the freezing cold and see his second inauguration?
Oh, yes. In fact, we'll also be at a party again in your honor the night before.
As we did last time.
Yes, yes.
Jan, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Talking Pints and giving us a positive view about Donald Trump's temperament, because we don't get much of that in the rest
we don't.
of the media.
And trust him. Trust him. He's going to continue to do good things for the people beyond America.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Right, OK, there you are. Isn't it nice to hear a different point of view to what you get on mainstream media? Now, it is time for Barrage the Farage. Mary asks, how many no-go areas do you think there are now in this lawless country? Mary, I shudder to think. What I do know is the police have basically withdrawn, in many regards, from all sorts of crimes that in the past would have been considered pretty serious. Your brand new motor car's just been stolen. The police will not come and see you and help you. You've been burgled. Oh, well, no time for the police to come around. And anyway, the clean-up rate's only about 1.5%. So, look, you know, I think we've got a massive, massive problem here. A growth of crime, but also a failure of policing. And Mary, believe me, what is coming across the English Channel in such vast numbers this month isn't helping any of it. Andrew asks, oh, Andrew, honestly, for goodness gracious me, if you had a choice of roles in government, what would it be? It's really interesting. The other week, Tony Abbott was in, and he sat in for this part of the programme, and one of you asked, what's your greatest achievement in life? And I talked about the Brexit campaign and getting a political insurgency going and what it led to. And Tony, you know, quite rightly said, well, of course, becoming Prime Minister of my country was an amazing thing to do. And he said, and I stopped the boats. I thought, yeah, he's really proud of the fact that he stopped the boats. So, the only possible role in government for me, there is only one, it's Home Secretary, because I would stop the boats. Oh, there'd be outrage all over the world. The UN, I'd be condemned by Sleepy Joe and everybody. But I would suss it. Robert asks, finally, do you think you should stop smoking? Oh, Robert, really? Goodness gracious me, you sound like my mum. Of course I should, but we all do things we shouldn't do. But you know what? I'm 58. I'm probably fitter than I've been for 25, 30 years. I may not be perfect, but I'm here. And I tell you what, I'm still giving the political class a tough time here at GB News. Back with you tomorrow at 7. But for now, it's got to be Mark Steyn.
I thought you were going to say your ambition was to be Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. That's one of those mysterious cabinet positions. I'm never actually sure what the guy does.
Get away with murder if you have that job.
That's true. That was a terrific show, Nigel. We're going to try and keep it going on this bank holiday. We have David Starkey. We have Kelvin Mackenzie. We have more tales from the streets of a broken Britain. We'll try and ask the big questions and focus on what's bothering you, where you live in this United Kingdom. That's all coming up straight after the weather.
Looking ahead to tomorrow's weather, and the UK is looking like a largely dry and bright day with plenty of sunny spells. Let's take a look at the details. Northern Scotland will start on a rather cloudy note with perhaps an isolated shower. A few glimmers of sunshine will develop as the morning progresses. Temperatures will be around 11 Celsius. A dry and largely bright start across Northern Ireland with any mist or fog patches quickly clearing.